Hello everyone, my name is Cody. I'm a PhD student at the University of Portsmouth and I'm a teaching fellow from the Institute of Criminal Justice Studies. My talk today is going to be on lie detection by strategic manipulation. So I'm going to talk to you about our new asymmetric information management technique that we've recently developed. So this presentation is going to be broken up into 3 parts. First, I'm going to explain the rationale for why we needed to develop a new interviewing technique. We're then going to look at the theoretical components of the AIM technique. And then we'll talk about the findings from our first published study. So the first thing we wanted to do was we really wanted to investigate the lie detection literature. Now, lie detection research predicts that truth tellers and liars should behave differently during interviews. That is, truth tellers should be able to freely disclose information they can retrieve from memory. And thus, they should be able to report a verbal forthcoming strategy. Liars, in contrast, are predicted to behave differently based upon a number of influential factors. This might be because they're unwilling to provide highly detailed statements, or they may simply be unable to fabricate such detailed information. Now, to combat this, one of the things that the lie detection literature has done is it's moved towards encouraging interviewees to say more. So when we take a closer look at this, we found that actually liars can, when prompted, provide more detailed statements. So in other words, when truth tellers are exposed to the encouraging interviewees to say more tools and techniques, they say more, as you would expect. But actually, what's unexpected is that liars do the same. What this means is that you have statements that are quite comparable, and as such, it's difficult to detect the differences between truth tellers and liars. So we wanted to move away from that. One way to move away from this was to create new tools and techniques that proactively exaggerate that difference between truth tellers and liars. So the goal of our AIM technique, our asymmetric information management technique, was to establish a new information management dilemma for truth tellers and liars. We wanted to make a new interviewing technique that when participants hear it, they respond to it depending on whether they're truthful, we wanted them to say more, or if they're deceptive, we wanted them to withhold more. So I'm going to talk you through the instruction, imagining that you're entering an interview context. Then we're going to look at some of the theoretical components underpinning this. So imagine you've just walked in and I'm your interviewer. Please pay attention to the following information. During interviews, individuals frequently overestimate how easily an analyst can determine if they're being deceptive or honest. Actually, lie detection is not easy, and I cannot take your honesty for granted. However, you can make it easier for us to determine if you're lying or being honest. This is because our lie detection techniques become more accurate and more reliable the more information you provide. That is, if you provide longer, more detailed statements, we will be better able to classify you as either lying or telling the truth. So that's essentially the crux of our AIM instructions. Now, this started based upon the illusion of transparency. So what we found with the illusion of transparency is that truth tellers really do take their credibility for granted. They think that because they're telling the truth, everyone can automatically just see this. They have the attitude that I'm telling the truth, so it doesn't matter, I don't need to say much. By creating these first 2 instructions, we're informing our truth tellers that this isn't the case. We can't automatically see that they're telling the truth, they need to do more. So as well as cueing them to this, we then created what we called a disclosure credibility association component. So the idea that if we prompt our truth tellers to provide more information, they will do so. And again, we reinforce this by saying it again, but in a different way. So what we have here is that truth tellers will hear these instructions and they'll provide more information. Liars, however, will take a different stance. They'll read this and think that, okay, so if I say more information, you're going to be able to better classify me. Well, then I'll say less. So then we get that asymmetric effect. So to finish this, we ended it with a report everything instruction, the same report everything instruction that's used in the control condition. Now, we've got our AIM instructions. In order to test this, we created 3 hypotheses. So the first thing we predicted was that truth tellers in the AIM condition would report more detail than truth tellers in the control. In contrast, liars in the aim condition will report less detail than liars in the control. And based on these two hypotheses, we predicted that accurate discrimination between truth tellers and liars would be enhanced in the aim condition compared to the control. So we designed a 2x2 between factors study, and we used overall detail using reality monitoring as our dependent measure. So reality monitoring is used within the lie detection literature as a way of coding statements to look for differences between truth tellers and liars. So what we've done is we invited truth tellers and liars to the lab, and we randomly allocated them to one of two counterbalanced missions. So they were either sent to the library to take part in a task, or they were sent to the Creative Arts building to do a secure drop-off. Now, to ensure that our findings were as a result of the aim technique and nothing else, we matched the two conditions based on how many physical meters the person walked, the time it took, and the difficulty of the task. Once our interviewees came back, we then randomly allocated them to either the aim condition or the control. Now, what we found was that truth tellers in the aim condition did indeed provide more overall detail compared to truth tellers in the control. In contrast, liars in the aim condition provided less overall detail than liars in the control. So we found support for hypothesis 1 and 2. Now on the graph, you can see that there's this asymmetric effect. Truth tellers hear the instruction and they're boosted up. Liars hear the instruction and they instead withhold. To test our third hypothesis, we looked at discriminant function, and we found in the aim condition there was 81% accuracy. So it was effective, compared to the control condition, which had 48% accuracy. Now, the control condition having 48% accuracy is consistent with lie detection literature. Usually in control conditions or in studies just looking at truth tellers and liars differences, it's around 50%. So that's consistent with the literature. To further test this, we looked at ROC curves, and we found a significant difference between the aim condition and the control. So from a lie detection perspective, this new technique is more credible. So to give you a summary as to what we found in our study, the current study demonstrated that our new interviewing technique can enhance information elicitation for truth tellers while simultaneously encouraging liars to withhold. When we look closer at the data, we found that the aim technique is more effective at eliciting information from truth tellers with a large effect than it is for suppressing information from liars, where we've got a medium effect. Now, this is important moving forward for the aim technique because we know that it's more effective at helping truth tellers. So we know that when we try to enhance this aim technique further, that is the direction we should be focusing in. Interestingly, we also found that there was an implicit effect. So we asked our participants, what do you think the aim technique is designed to do? Do you think you said more information when you heard these instructions or less information? And truth tellers weren't aware, nor were liars. When liars heard the instructions, they thought they said no less or no more than what they would have done normally. So it has an unconscious effect. Now, if you are interested in the study and finding out more about this, we have published this in TARMAC. Alternatively, if you do want to know more about the paper or more about this new interviewing technique, you can also contact me. I'll put these slides up on the OSF, and if you're interested in any aspects of this or you're interested in collaborating, you can drop me a message. Okay, so I want to thank you guys for listening. And we're now going to move on to the next stage, which I believe is some questions. So I've got 3 questions designed for you guys that we're going to go through. So that's going to be where you guys have got to come off and talk to me. Okay, so if I ask you guys, as either a truth teller or a liar, how do you think you would have responded to these instructions? What do you think? What are your initial thoughts?
So if anybody wants to unmute themselves, and they can obviously respond to Cody.
So Cody, you're asking how would we have responded when we were being interviewed? Would we have provided more or less information?
Yeah, what do you think you would have done?
So it's hard to know because when there's not a comparison. So if you're only ever guilty or innocent, then you don't get the sense of how you might relatively adapt your behavior between truth and lies for the same person. As a truth teller, probably I would have given a very detailed response.
I think it encourages that because it really does help truth tellers. I mean, that's the main function of it. It's designed to really support our truth tellers. It does hinder liars, but for truth tellers, it makes it so obvious that we want more information.
Yeah.
I think it would be really, really interesting to try this kind of technique with individuals where they naturally don't want to express that much information. So I come from a perspective of kind of like violence memory. So a lot of people don't necessarily want to divulge a lot of information, even though they are telling the truth. So maybe it would be really interesting to also see the complexities there. Like, would those individuals be comfortable to, because they are telling the truth, divulge lots of details? So I think obviously it'd be really interesting to see this in other situations as well.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where it goes into other contexts and how people respond to it.
In situations where they don't necessarily want to divulge a lot.
Of course. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Okay, so if I go on to our second question. Now, I appreciate this is a new technique. We've only got one published study at the moment, but at a glance, what are your thoughts on its application in the real world? Do you think this is something that we could take and use?
Silence. Yeah, I think so. Why not? I mean, this is the first study, right?
Yeah, first study.
Yeah. I really think it would be worthwhile to look at what happens when people are lying about some things and telling the truth about some things. To see if you can distinguish for that same person when they're being honest and not. Because how would you do that? You know? Does that make sense, that point to you? So in your study, you had people who either lied or told the truth, and your comparison was between subjects, no?
Yeah. Yeah. So are you saying have the person tell some truths and some lies?
Yeah.
One of the things that we do as a manipulation check is we ask people how much truthfulness they provided and how much lies they provide, because what we find in the lie detection literature is that people embed. So often people who are particularly good at lying will embed some truth within that, or rather they'll embed their lie within a truthful story. So for example, while liars might have gone to one building, they can tell some truths. They can talk about the weather, they can talk about how they felt, they can talk about whether they text someone. So we did account for that. We did take that into consideration. It would be quite tricky to use this technique to try and get a truthful and deceptive statement from someone. I'm not sure how we would do that. It's an interesting point. It's something to think about.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how you would use it in a real life situation, because if you were trying to distinguish when someone was telling the truth about something and lying about something within the context of one interview, you want to look at differences in how they modify their verbal reports.
Okay, so more for within subjects design.
Exactly, within subjects.
Yeah, that'd be a really interesting way to move this forward. Definitely,
yeah.
I agree.
We have actually had a couple of questions in the chat screen as well, some individuals who have some issues with their mics. So I can see that William Atwood has put a question for you saying, do you think that this technique could be used in accumulation with other techniques, for example, the VA technique? I'm not entirely certain what that technique is. I'm not sure if you know it, Cody, but saying, could it be worked in partnership?
I do indeed. So a little bit about the VA. So the verifiability approach is looking at information that can be verified, so checkable information. Could this be used alongside it? Yes, I don't see why not. I think, yeah, it could, definitely.
Fantastic. And sorry, I can see another question as well from Julie Higgins saying that you mentioned reality monitoring. Were you referring to Marisa Johnson's framework? Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Or could you say more about the role of reality monitoring?
Yeah, no, that's correct.
So could you tell us a little bit more about reality monitoring, please, Cody?
Yeah, so the reality monitoring is the idea that when people are telling the truth, they will use different types of information. So, for example, they'll use more things like spatial information. Spatial information being where you make reference to how you move through space. So, for example, if I'm telling you the truth, I'll give more of this information. I'll say, I turned left, then I walked towards. Left and towards being an example of spatial information. They use lots more sensory details. So comparisons with time as well, they'll use temporal things. So first of all, I done this. Next, I done this. Then I done this. So they're giving you that more chronological stuff to work upon. So what we wanted to do is we didn't want to separate off into spatial, temporal, and perceptual. We wanted to look at overall details as a whole.
That's really interesting. Maddie, how long do we have left in this section? So I want to see if, obviously, if anybody wanted to raise their hands, if they've got any other questions.
I do have a third question.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Do you want to move on with your third question?
That's okay, just to get your opinions on things. From a memory perspective, what do you think we could use to enhance the IM technique? So we've had about the verifiability approach, which would work really well alongside the IM technique. What about memory perspective? So at the minute, it's just used with a standard tell me everything instruction. Is there anything you guys think we could use to enhance this?
I'm not sure if anybody else has any opinions, which would be a lot more evidence than mine, but have you considered using confidence ratings? So as you were talking a little bit about the accuracy and how much accuracy could be measured with this, whether you could also take, when somebody was telling the truth, do they actually understand how accurate they are going to be? So we know that a lot of people, when delivering memory evidence, if they tell you that they're 100% confident about the detail that they're recalling under a tell me everything, they are normally quite accurate. So whether you could input confidence ratings in there as well.
That's an interesting point. That would be quite a nice thing to bring in. And if we were to do that, we could look at accuracy and how accurate people are being, whether or not this encouraging people to say more is at a cost to accuracy. That's a good point.
Yes,
because
it is always a worry that, as you say, if you are encouraging individuals to, you know, divulge as much as they can possibly remember, do you go down the trait of they will start to give you other details? So whether it would be useful for you to also get are they aware of what they're giving you and how accurate it is?
Absolutely. That's a good point. That's a new line of research, definitely worth investigating.
So Maddie has just given me the 2-minute warning in case of any other questions now. I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add to Cody's last question, because I'm sure you know miles more than what I do. So I've got something come up in the chat. So Cody, would you expect similar results in real cases where liars have more time to actually prepare some sort of alibi?
Yeah, I think I would, because I think the instruction, especially because it acts implicitly, it's unconscious. When liars hear the instruction, it's almost as if they are tricked into withholding. You know, they've got this idea in mind, they've got this plan, because they're all given time to rehearse and to plan a story. But when they go in, they say much less. I think if we were to put it into the real world, and if we're to retest it, we're going to start to see similar things, I hope.
Well, that is really, really interesting. Does anybody have any other questions that they want to either raise in the chat, or if they want to unmute themselves and ask it to Cody before we move on to our next speaker? Just give some people a chance to type it out in case they're typing it in the chat. No, I'm going to presume that that's no more questions then. But obviously, if you do have any other burning questions that you wanted to ask, fingers crossed we'll have some time at the end so they can continue to discuss it with you, Cody. That is really, really interesting research into seeing the differences between truth and lies. I've definitely learned a lot from that. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Maddie, would you like to take us to our next speaker?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Cody. It was really interesting. And next we have Harriet Smith with a novel interactive face matching procedure, performance of normal and superior face recognizers. So I'm just going to make you co-host now, Harriet, and just if you'd like to share your screen when you're ready.
Sorry, I'm sharing it.
Yeah, no, it's your time.
Whilst Harriet's figuring out how to share her screen, I'm really sorry to anybody who was actually just waving at Cody with questions then. I just saw it as I maximised my screen. If you do have anything left that you wanted to ask Cody, fingers crossed we'll have some more time at the end for you to ask it. I'm so sorry that I didn't see that.
Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Not yet, no. Has it appeared for anyone else? Oh, yep, that's
Here
gone.
we go.
Yeah,
There we go.
Wow.